Tony D and Little Joan, and this is a screenwriter's tip. Today we're going to talk about it's kind of an advanced, I think, screenwriting advice. So maybe not for the people who are just starting out, but this will be sort of like where the focus of your screenplay should be and how to kind of find that and work that. So smash like and subscribe, etc., etc. Check out my books, The Pineys, etc., etc. By the way, with The Pineys, for some reason, book 9 wasn't. I must have clicked the wrong thing. It wasn't in KDP Select, which is Kindle Unlimited. Now it is. So I don't know. It may take a few hours for that to hit, but I don't know why it was screwed up. But I fixed it. Anyhow, getting into some screenplay writing. So you're working on a screenplay, and you gotta kind of figure out where the focus of the screenplay is. And what I mean by that is the most recent example, which sort of inspired this, was Cocaine Bear. Cocaine Bear, and you could watch my hour and 20-minute analysis, has the wrong focus, in my view. It focuses on the relationships of a bunch of characters nobody should really care about in a crazy movie like Cocaine Bear. Now, that's not to say that relationships don't matter even in a crazy comedy like that, but they are vastly secondary as opposed to the comedy and mayhem that should erupt. Like, the relationships should support the mayhem, not the other way around, which I think is kind of the problem with Cocaine Bear. It gets bogged down in a bunch of relationships that no one would care about. If they did, you would have to make the bear probably much meaner and almost secondary to the entire story. And you would have to eliminate scenes like the one great scene in that movie, which is the ambulance chase. So it's very easy when you're writing a screenplay, and even when you're working with a producer or director or whoever you're working with, your client, I'll say, to get to lose the focus. And part of the inspiration for this was I just got off the phone with one of my clients, and we're working on a screenplay, and we work very well together. And I think, and so we're working on this new screenplay, and this is kind of a I wouldn't say it's a departure for me, but I don't write a ton of drama. And when you're working on dramas, and this is about relationships and men and women and stuff like that, it's very kind of there's a lot of detail in the dialogue, as opposed to, say, events, right? As opposed to just joking around. Like when I write a ton of comedy. So when you're writing comedy, the events can kind of be big, and they're kind of throwaways for the comedy. It's everything's to fuel the comedy. You're constantly throwing stuff on the comedy fire. With drama, it's more like you're building a little model castle, and you have to get all the details right. So at the end, you pull back from it and go, ooh. I mean, it can be that way in a lot of stories, but particularly, I think, in a drama. Because in a drama, it's nothing's really a throwaway, you know? You know, you can kind of make throwaway dramas. You can make soap operas, right? Soap operas are a bit of throwaway because you're just grinding and grinding through stuff for more and more drama, and then another reveal, and another cliffhanger, and another, and another, and another. And you're just grinding through them left and right, so you have all these ups and downs in this crazy roller coaster. But with a movie, you're building to one specific sort of statement, I'll say, or climax, where you reveal something and people go, whoa, oh man, wow, because it's a drama, right? That's the reaction you want. With comedies, it's like, ha, ha, ha. But with a drama, it's like, whoa, oh man, what's gonna happen? Wow, I didn't see that coming. That's the kind of sort of reaction you want, or like, wow, they're gonna get back together, or they're gonna break up forever, or I never saw that. I didn't think he would die. So, how do you keep that focus is really the question. Well, one of the ways is I'm very fortunate that my current client and I, we were very much on the same page. So he called me tonight. I had sent him some pages, and he had given me some notes on some scenes and then talked about the next scene, and that's exactly where I was headed. Right? He basically suggested the next scene should be like X, Y, and Z, and I was like, oh my God, that was going to be the next scene. So I think when you're in tune a lot with your client or whoever you're working with, that is a huge factor. It's a huge factor. Um, but and when you're not, it can be a struggle. To either you're trying to get your client in tune with you, or you're trying to get in tune with them, and to give them what they want, while at the same time giving them what they need. And what you need in screenplays are number one, of course, which I always talk about, the format, the structure. That's a number one thing you need, because without that format and structure, as you can just be in the weeds when you're producing a damn movie. It's a plan. It's a plan to make the movie. And again, going back to Cocaine Bear, and I only use that because it's recent in my mind, and I think it's so glaring, right? The first act, pretty serviceable. The second act's going someplace, but the third act in Cocaine Bear, in my opinion, just kind of S's the bed. And it didn't have to be that way. Anyone looking at that movie, I think, from a purely structural format perspective, as a screenwriter, would see, here's the first act. The second act is here, and then the third act should be way up here. But in the case of Cocaine Bear, the movie that came out, the first act is here, the second act is here, and in my view, the third act is back down here. That is not the way you want a comedy. A comedy goes right to the moon. And with a drama too. And with most movies, you're ending big. You're ending with the biggest revelation. In a sci-fi, it's the mind-blowing, mind-shattering ending of, I don't know, let's say Interstellar is the only thing that came to mind. But even though I think it's a terrible movie, it's formatted correctly, because the ending is Matthew McConaughey comes back. It's turned out he's traveled through time. He's been gone for years, but he hasn't aged, kind of thing. And he ends up, I think, leaving again at the end of the movie or whatever. But that's because it's sci-fi. That's the big sci-fi revelation at the end. Spent a little too much time out there, and time moved at weird moments, and people were back on Earth rooting for him and whatever. You want a sci-fi thing for the ending. That's a big revelation. For Star Wars, the big ending is, the death of the Death Star. But for dramas, in my case, we want a big dramatic ending. We want we want a lot of screaming and a lot of teeth gnashing and like, oh my God, what has happened? And also, you want to say something too. And there's a message in there that you have to figure out. And I'm not even done in the first act on this screenplay, but we're figuring out the message as we're writing this thing and developing it. The developing part of it, for those of you not in tune what that is really, is you're talking back and forth about the story, the elements that you're going to put in there, and kind of the direction. You're sort of guiding the story in a certain direction, and kind of, you don't want to micromanage it, but maybe you want to guide it. In my case, it's also true that we're trying to keep it within a certain budget, so we don't want to go too crazy. And there's a few stylistic things we talked about, but mainly to keep your focus, you always want to remember the premise of the movie too, and what drives the premise. And that will keep you focused on what's important. Besides the structure, which you must follow the structure, you must follow the format, you must always remember what the premise of the movie was. In the case of Cocaine Bear, the premise is it's a bear on cocaine doing a bunch of crazy things. So the only way to go in terms of the format is things must get crazier. And then, is it a comedy or is it a horror movie? Well, if it's a horror movie, things must get crazier and more scary. But in this case, it's a comedy. So things must be crazier and funny. In my case, things must get more dramatic. The stakes must get higher, and the drama must pay off in a big and unexpected way. That's an important element, too. You don't want an ending that you can see coming a mile away. And that's the problem with a lot of action movies. At least a lot of the trailers I see. Some of them are perfectly serviceable, even though you may kind of know what's coming. Like, you know the good guy's going to win, or you know that at the end the guy's going to sacrifice himself to win or whatever. But if you're following the format and you're up in the ante and you're bringing everything to a head, really the ending should reveal itself to you. It should reveal itself. Like, this has to end this way because of what we set up in the beginning, the things we said, and the statement we want to make, the premise we have here. You can't get too bogged down in the statement, but there is something to be said for the statement, what you're saying with the movie. That's not an ideological thing, usually. Might be, but usually not. Because you can be ideologically opposed to what your characters are doing, but understand that they're forced to do it. So, in the case of a character sacrificing themselves in a heroic moment, you may not agree with that. You may say, well, I wouldn't have done that. I want to live. But from the terms of the story, that may be necessary to give you the biggest punch at the end, which is generally what you're going for. So, besides the fact that you want a client or whoever you're working with to sort of be on your page, if you're not on that page, by the way, you got to try to get there. If you're fighting back and forth on how the movie should end, or what you're really saying, or what the movie is about, and certainly if you're fighting over the premise, you gotta get on the same page, I think. And once you're on the same page, and everybody's kind of getting what they want, and sometimes you're gonna have to make a little bit of a compromise. A lot of my clients are actors, so they want to do certain things in a movie. Maybe they want to have a romantic scene, or maybe they want to shoot people, or have a big moment, a monologue, if you will, or something. Acting moments. Maybe they want to die in a scene, whatever. So assuming that jibes with what you're writing, absolutely, you should include that. If it doesn't jibe, well, then you got to talk to them about, number one, this doesn't really jibe with the premise and the direction we're going. Maybe this is the wrong movie for that. Maybe you need to, for instance, die heroically in a different movie. Or maybe we need to write a different movie, change the story in such a way so you can die heroically at the end. Either one is possible. It kind of depends on your client and kind of depends on what they want. I mean, ultimately, the client decides. When you're a screenwriter, 9 times out of 10, unless you're writing it for yourself or you're writing it on spec, you're writing it in such a way that you're going to get the best story possible. Sometimes clients will insist that's not what they want, or they disagree with you, and you have to consider that you may be wrong, that maybe the client does have a direction that may be better. It kind of depends upon the client. Now, I've worked for clients who, man, they suggested the stupidest endings in the world, and I just thought, this is never gonna work. And very rarely, a client will suggest to me something better than I imagined, and you may have to give it a chance. It kind of depends on your situation and the client you're working for, but when it gets right down to it, you must sort of keep the focus in mind, and that goes back to your premise. And in the case of Cocaine Bear, I think they really lost the thread. By the midway through the second act, they were more concerned about the relationships between characters that should have just been killed by the bear, and more concerned about their feelings and, you know, everybody being okay at the end, which isn't what the premise suggests. The premise, like Cocaine Bear, suggests a nonstop sort of free for all of comedy and mayhem, and that you want to keep increasing the mayhem. Now, sometimes you could put too much of that. I would say a movie like Hardcore Henry, which I saw, but it was interesting, but I felt it had almost too much. Mainly because it wasn't. I don't think it was ever designed to be a movie with a story. It was more designed to be almost like an art installation, because it was that whole POV craziness. And don't get me wrong, the short is amazing, and even the movie itself is very exciting. But after a while, I think you just become numb to it, and I think there's too much action in that case and not enough story. And part of the problem is you can't connect with the character because you never see him. I don't think so. Maybe he looks in a mirror at one point in that. I don't remember, but it's all point of view in Hardcore Henry if you've never seen it. So, when working for a client and trying to keep your focus, stick with the premise. Stick with that. It's also a good idea to come up with that one line, that one sort of tagline for the movie. That is often a way I keep the premise and the focus of the movie in mind. I keep going back to the tagline. So, for instance, in my webcomic Superfat, the tagline is, "It's Animal House meets the Justice League." So whenever I feel like I've kind of gone off the rails and gotten away from the concept, I always try to remind myself of, oh wait, this is supposed to be Animal House meets the Justice League. What would the, crazy Justice League do in this situation if I want to up the ante again and again? Now, I'm limited these days by the fact that I don't have new artwork coming in, but that's a way to refocus my energies in terms of writing the story. When working for a client, you can get flustered because your client can be very forceful sometimes, and maybe push you in this direction or that. One of the reasons you want to always tie the price of your screenplay into your time is because some clients will test that and will say, well, why don't you just try it this way and let's see how it works. Unfortunately, that's usually a testament to, hey, why don't you write a draft like this? And if it doesn't work, have you write another draft. You kind of don't want to be trapped in that, which is why I try not to take like a flat fee if I can help it. Or I tell a client up front, well, I'll take the flat fee, but if this goes on for, past, let's say, 3 months, I'm going to say, no, you got to start paying me more money because we've done too many drafts of this. And it kind of depends on your client too. Like my current client, he's very, very good about that kind of thing. I don't really have to worry about him. I've written, oh gosh, how many screenplays have I written for him? I think we're coming up on 6 or 7. I'd have to look to spit so many. Plus a lot of short things. And so we have a good rapport. I don't have to worry about him. Other clients, however, especially a new client, out the gate, you should worry about that. You should make it very clear, like, listen, this money only covers a certain amount of my time. After that, we got to talk about moving on or giving me more money. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, you don't want to undercharge so you're making minimum wage. You want to charge the right amount so you're making, okay money. Whether this is a side gig or a real gig to you. I mean, if it's a real gig, you got to make rent, right? If you're writing a screenplay and the money is enough to cover you for a month, you absolutely have to be done this thing within a month. Without a doubt. It shouldn't even be close. So 2-3 weeks tops. And then give yourself that extra buffer week in case something really goes wrong. And after that, well, then you got to start. After a month, you're going to have to start going, listen, You know, this money only covered about a month, and we've done 2 drafts of this thing. It's time you got to send me some more money, or else, you know, I got to bow out. Um, and there's also the idea too that you want to write within a certain window, right? You want to write within a window of time that you know, you don't want to go too long. It's very easy for some people to spend, you know, 6 months to a year writing a screenplay, or even something like a short book or whatever. And that's just, unless there's like a ton of research in it, that's usually way too long. I mean, especially for a screenplay. To me, a screenplay uh, is 2 weeks to a month tops. If you're, you know, especially if you're in LA and you're a working screenwriter, if you're going to do more than, you know, 2 or 3 drafts of this thing, that's one thing. It kind of depends on the studio or whatever. And most places are going to give you at least 2 months, and they're paying you so much money. Why not take the 2 months to relax your brain? But or 3 months or whatever. If you're working a year on something, that's too much, and that may be part of the explanation of why the Marvel movies have become so terrible. They may be overdeveloped. You know, it is possible to overdevelop things because you lose sight again of the focus. You develop and you develop and you develop something. It's like going down a rabbit hole. You end up dismissing the most obvious ideas because they feel like, well, that feels like an old idea. That feels too obvious. It probably wasn't in the beginning of the process, but when you're 3 or 4 months into a process and you've kind of dismissed those obvious ideas because you're trying to come up with something more clever, that's when you're down the rabbit hole and you end up with these convoluted ideas. So, for instance, I was just looking at the screenplay I just, or the other screenwriter's rant, right? Uh, Most Dangerous Game, New York. And it's not a bad premise, but it looks a little convoluted. It looks like they put a little too much development in that. And that may be the result of they've done the movie a lot of times. They're trying to be different, but it's already different because it's Most Dangerous Game, you know, hunting humans in New York. So you already got the solid premise there. I think only 1 or 2 of those versions of the Most Dangerous Game were kind of done in a city. I remember one with a homeless guy who turned out to be a vet or whatever. But I think even then they took him into the woods. They meet him in the city, but he ends up in the woods. The Most Dangerous Game, New York. I mean, that's the whole premise. You don't need to throw in a whole bunch of other things, a whole bunch of other elements on top of that. And I think, from what I've seen of the trailer, it's a little convoluted. I think they would be better off to streamline it somewhat. But that's just me, and then concentrate on, you know, the interesting kills, which you always like to see in a movie like that. They already got guys with different weapons. I mean, that's a sort of an easy way to do it. I think you want to go more for their personalities than the weapons, but you know, you could give, you know, and there's been a rash of Hitman movies, and they're beginning to blend into each other a lot, you know. And don't get me wrong, I like the John Wick movie. The first one is really good. The other ones are okay. I'm kind of tuned out on them. They're kind of starting to blend together. And there's been a lot of other knockoffs of it, and they're all very similar. They're all kind of just the same thing over and over again. Hitman, turns out he's not such a bad guy, and that's his job to kill people, but really deep down he's not a bad guy. I think Bullet Train is all about hitmen too. I mean, it's become a Hollywood trope, and I think it's long overdue to abandon that, because as much as superheroes are starting to show their fatigue, there's still a lot to explore there that hasn't been explored. There's still a lot of characters that haven't gotten their due in comics. But Hitman, I think, yeah, it's way overdone. You know, and that's one of the other things you have to offer in your premise is something different, something original. You know, you can do another Hitman movie if you have an original idea. You know, something different than everything that's gone before. You know, like a hitman suffering from depression. Has it been done? I don't think it has. Maybe, it would be more of a comedy probably. Um, but anyhow, so that's what I'm talking about tonight. That was keeping your focus, keeping your focus on what you need to do, and it's a good idea to sort of check yourself too, to step back, yeah, even while you're in the midst of writing it, and say, all right, am I doing what was the original premise here? Am I bringing it to that? And you may have to change the premise, that's true, but if you change the premise, then you really have to go back and look at what you've done so far, right? But overall, you should probably stick with the premise if you've gotten a good premise and you've agreed upon that, and really look at it and say to yourself, does this add to the premise? In the case of the Cocaine Bear, it was all about the mayhem and the comedy. In the case of The Most Dangerous Game, I think it's all about the hunting aspect of hunting humans. Not so much the intrigue, which they seem to add between the hunted and the hunters. I think it's just more about the hunters. In this case, hunting in an urban environment as opposed to, one that's more rural. And anyhow, so that's it. That's my advice tonight on screenwriter tips. So I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for tuning in. Little Joan, thanks you. Check me out on Odysee, Bitchute, and Rumble for more bass takes. We have a Hollywoke hot take and a news blast. I will be at Millburn, New Jersey, at the Book House on Thursday, March 2nd for the next signing, and I may be announcing another signing soon right after that. But we're currently in negotiations. It sounds pretty exciting. It's going to be in the Pines if it happens. I think it's going to be at least one day, maybe 3. It's a 3-day event. I don't know if they want me there all 3 days, but we're in negotiations. I'll let you know soon. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you